Welcome to Lesson 10. This lesson is about commissioning and qualification. In this lesson, we are going to be looking at what is validation versus what is qualification and the difference between the two. What is commissioning and who should be involved in commissioning activities? Validation is proof or demonstration that something is what it claims to be. It is full, detailed documentation that all processes and procedures are functioning in the manner they are designed for. And it is a scientifically designed program that all processes and procedures consistently do what they are designed to do. This diagram here is the validation continuum, and it just shows you the ongoing basis of validation. So you've got your design, your installation, and your preparation, your startup, and then you have ongoing production. There is a definition of your of your systems and your subsystems going on during your design phase. When you get to your installation phase, you've got your IQ that overlaps with your PQ, and then into your performance qualification. These are the different phases of your validation. On an ongoing basis, once commercial production is ongoing, you would be periodically doing your annual product reviews to make sure that everything is maintaining its validated state, and also change control would feed into your validation assessment to make sure that everything maintains its validated state. Validation versus qualification. So qualification is a documented process of assurance that the specific system, premises, or equipment is able to achieve the predetermined acceptance criteria. So what you have outlined at the start, your system is able to meet that. It is a subset of validation, so it provides the documentation that the critical components, so the critical ones of direct impact systems, so your facilities, your equipment, or your software, that they are properly designed, they're properly installed, and they're tested according to the predefined acceptance criteria you've outlined. Validation is the documented process that provides a high degree of assurance that a specific system, a process, or a facility will consistently produce a product meeting its predetermined specifications and its quality attributes. If you look at this, if we take a system, a facility, or equipment as a whole, and we break it down into direct impact and indirect impact, we're going to be talking about those again in a minute. And then we look at what needs to be qualified and what needs to be commissioned. So everything needs to be commissioned. It's all done as part of the GEP, the Good Engineering Practices. But the part that we really would worry about qualification for is the part that is the direct impact. Qualification or validation. So an equipment or a system is qualified. A system must be qualified to operate in a validated process. Qualification is based upon predetermined user requirements and specification. So that includes your IQ, your OQ, and your PQ. So when your system or your equipment is qualified, your process is validated. So processes are validated based upon product requirements. So you qualify an autoclave where you might validate the sterilization process. That includes your IQ, your OQ, your PQ, and your process validation as well. So test your knowledge. So take a little minute here to see the following items if you think they should be qualified or if they should be validated. So a clean room. A clean room would be qualified. A wash tank would be qualified. The HVAC would be qualified. Freeze drying is a process, so that's going to be validated. Water treatment, water for injection, that is going to be validated also because that is a process. The freeze dryer is a piece of equipment, so that's going to be qualified. Mixing, as opposed to a mixer. So mixing is a process that's going to be validated, but the reactor the mixing happens in would be qualified. And your autoclave, again, would be qualified. So I hope you got those right. Commissioning is a well-planned, documented and managed engineering approach to the startup and turnover of facilities, systems and equipment to the end user that results in a safe and functioning environment that meets established design requirements and stakeholders' expectations, and that comes from the ISPE Baseline 5 Commissioning and Qualification. So it's worth having a look through that document. It's got a lot of good information in it, and that is in line with the good engineering practices. So everything gets commissioned, and commissioning is a subset of validation. It's the studies we do to see how things are working and to make sure everything is working correctly. Commissioning is a GEP requirement, a good engineering practices requirement. Qualification and validation are also, but they're also a GMP requirement as well. The objective in commissioning is to identify and to fix problems that might be out there. The objective in qualification or validation is to demonstrate that the process is being operated under control. In commissioning, you may not have a clear protocol with established acceptance criteria, but in qualification and validation, you absolutely must have a pre-approved protocol to be working from. Commissioning is controlled by the engineering or the project team, whereas qualification or validation are controlled by the user and the QA group. In commissioning, you might not necessarily need to review all data because a lot of it is for information purposes. In qualification and validation, absolutely all data and changes have to be reviewed and approved. In commissioning, there's usually no written report, although there may be, but it's not an absolute requirement, whereas in qualification and validation, it absolutely is a requirement. Commissioning is the supplier's responsibility, and it's driven by commercial requirements to get to know your piece of equipment properly and to figure out that it's working okay. Qualification or validation are a user's responsibility, and they're based on the scientific need to demonstrate control. Commissioning is owned by the supplier, and qualification is owned by the user. So they're the inherent differences between the two. Commissioning considerations then. So things you might be looking at when you're talking about commissioning. So was your specified equipment or systems installed correctly? Have you been set up with proper utilities? So your purified water, your vacuum, your waste, all of those type of things. Is there full functional testing being done so everything is operating as it should? Has there been a process put in place for managing of spare parts? What spare parts are needed? Where can you get them? What's the lead time for them? How many sets do you need to keep in-house, and how regularly are you expecting to have to change them over? Is there an appropriate computer interface with your piece of equipment? Have you looked at all the safety and environmental concerns? Do you need to do risk assessments? Do you need to check your emergency stop buttons if there are any other safety requirements? Where is the waste going and how is it being handled? Is it safe? Documentation is always a keystone for anything like this, and our system equipment manuals and SOPs need to be put in place as part of your commissioning operations. Also, you'll be looking at operator training. So who's going to be operating this piece of equipment and what training will they need to do that? Your SAT, your site acceptance test, and your FAT, your factory acceptance test, will form part of this commissioning as well. So the key to commissioning is to capture all the supplier's experience and knowledge. They have a huge amount of information about this piece of equipment that you're going to put in, or this vessel or whatever it is, and you want to capture as much of that as you can, because the more you know about what you're installing, the more smoothly all of your commissioning and validation operations are going to go, and ultimately the better it's going to run when it's in commercial production also. The main point of commissioning is to identify any problems before you start your validation. Once your validation starts, you really don't want to be encountering problems, because you get into having to retest and rerun parts of your validation and get into deviations and everything. So you find out all your problems and have everything very smoothly running prior to getting into validation. So who's involved? You will have a vendor or the supplier, probably a contractor, the construction manager, and the commissioning team. The commissioning team's roles and responsibilities. So they're going to be working very closely with the construction manager to implement the commissioning plan. So planning is really important. What's going to happen, when it's going to happen. Then how is it going to be executed? The commissioning team is responsible for making sure that the QA activities of others are done right, because you probably would be dealing with suppliers who may or may not be used to working in GMP environments, so you may need oversight on what they're doing to make sure that they're compliant with your procedures. The factory acceptance test and the site acceptance test then would need to be run, and develop and execute commissioning protocols if they're required. Track issues and help troubleshoot, retest parts of the process if it's needed, and complete any documentation that's required. Typical commissioning checks might be things like making sure your electrical power is working, checking that your lubrication is okay, and knowing where you need to maintain that. Safety checks, then making sure your emergency stops, any other safety requirements are adhered to. Making sure that you're looking after drainage. Do you need to have wastewater? Where does it need to be processed to? Etc. Solvent or solution connections. Will you need to be hooked up to solvent lines or purified water lines or water for injection or whatever? Valves, making sure that your valves are all correctly oriented and are working properly, and your pipework and your fittings, that it's all tightly secured. Can you think of any others? Just take a minute and see if there's any other commissioning checks that you can think about. So you might have thought of some of these already. So other things would be your utilities checks. So your vacuum, your water, any other utilities that you might need. The loop checks that everything is connected, okay? Alarms and interlocks, are they all working properly? Your P&ID drawings, walking down through those to make sure everything is okay on that. Is there calibration certs associated with this commission, and making sure that they are maintained and stored and controlled appropriately? The verification of the proper operation, including test sequences, and that would mean that you would simulate a shutdown and a startup to make sure that they are operating correctly. Alignment of hot or cold water if necessary, and then how you want to clean this piece of equipment. Is it easily cleaned, and is there any special requirements that you'd need to put in place? This reference will be in your appendix section for the lesson, and it's the ISPE Baseline Guide Volume 5 for Commissioning and Qualification. And you can see some other useful information and other references here. So just over to you to check your understanding. So what is validation? And what is the difference between commissioning and qualification? Thank you very much for your time and attention. We'll see you